Hi, Robin here. Welcome back to Toadstool Tarot. Today I'm featuring the Tarot in Wonderland. I have a little bit of a preamble, so if you're interested in just seeing the cards, drag that cursor on ahead. Now, I've been a fan of Alice in Wonderland and Lewis Carroll for many, many years. And I'm a bit of a purist about the stories. I started collecting some time ago this little series from Collector's Library of Classics, which made it easier for me to collect and read classics that had given me trouble before. This one, these little books come with illustrations in them. They come with a little red cloth hardcover. And gilt edges and beautiful paper, like thin like Bible pages, and they all have these little cloth bookmarks, which is really nice. They are formatted like page turners, not too much text to a page, making them easy to read, which is why I've been collecting a lot of classics and been able to read them in this series where I haven't been able to do that before. These were put out by Barnes & Noble. I think Barnes & Noble has stopped, and I believe some other British publisher has taken over publishing this size format. But if you Google Collector's Library, you should be able to see what's available in this series. Anyway, this one has Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. Later in the 80s, when I was working in a bookstore, I came across this book, which I love. If you love the Alice stories, you will love this. It is The Further Adventures of Lewis Carroll's Alice, called Alice Through the Needle's Eye by Gilbert Adair, published by Dutton. And the illustrator is Jenny Thorne, and her illustrations are very much in keeping with the original John Tenniel illustrations. You can probably see Alice depicted here looks very much like the Tenniel Alice. And this is a great book. It has the same wit and surrealism and logic that the original stories had. And the basic plot of this one is Alice, at the beginning of the story, is trying to thread a needle, and she looks so close into the needle's eye as she's threading it that she falls through the needle's eye and ends up landing in a haystack, which turns out not to be a haystack, but an A-stack. It's a stack made out of A's rather than strands or pieces of hay. And thereby she goes through this whole series involving the alphabet. If you recall, Alice in Wonderland was built around the theme of playing cards. Alice Through the Looking Glass was built around the theme of chess and a chessboard, and this one is through learning or investigating the alphabet A to Z. It's a great book. I recommend it, and I don't know if it's still in print, but you can find on Amazon used copies at still a reasonable price. Now, on to this. The Tarot in Wonderland. It's by Barbara Moore, illustrated by Eugene Smith, published by Llewellyn. I don't have any other Barbara Moore books, and I really like this one. I was going to wait until I was finished reading the whole guidebook before doing a walkthrough, but I'm a little bit impatient. I'm about a fourth to a third of the way through the guidebook. These Llewellyn packages are quite hefty. This one feels like it weighs about 5 pounds. They come in a magnetic enclosure, which I love. Here you can see the chessboard design. Little ribbon where you can lift out the guidebook. And this one, and then the cards come in a little recessed area. For some reason, this has more cards than fit comfortably in the recess. Seems like it's built for about 7 or 8 less cards than are actually in the deck. I don't know why they constructed it that way, but the book, like all Llewellyn books, or most that I've encountered, is full-color illustrations of each card in the deck, and a page to 2 pages of description about each card. This includes the illustrations by Eugene Smith, but it also, has comparable little insets of the Tenniel illustrations where they correspond to certain cards. They don't all have them, but some of them do, and that's a kind of nice little extra touch. Each card description starts with a section called Through the Looking Glass, in which Barbara describes the visual symbols and elements in the card as related to the storyline. And then the second section is called Down the Rabbit Hole, and that one talks about how to interpret that particular card in a reading. And then you have key words at the end of each card, and there seem to be about maybe 12 of them per card. This doesn't have the typical notes pages in the book like you get in a lot of Llewellyn books, although I don't know how many people actually use those. I tend not to. I don't really like to deface my books by scribbling in them. I'll keep a separate journal for any thoughts that I might have about cards or interpretation. My copy of the book is damaged. I damaged it by accident. I was reading it in bed and fell asleep and rolled over on it, and I don't know if you could see, the corner got dog-eared. So, still readable, but, it's a shame. Anyway, onto the cards. They lift out of the box with an easy ribbon marker. The cards are decent flexibility. I wouldn't say they're particularly thin. Some people have trouble with Llewellyn cards. I'm not sure if this is one of the better cards or the less good ones. They're fine by me. They're very glossy. The colors are nice. Oh, and I was such a purist about the Tenniel illustrations that even though there's several Alice decks on the market, I refused to buy them for a long time until I saw another channel that featured some card readings with these cards, and I thought, oh, those are kind of handsome looking. Let me see how much that is, and it was a reasonable price, and I thought, actually, for that price, I think I'd like to actually physically handle and walk through those cards. So even though these are not my ideal representation of the Alice images, it is a pretty deck. The colors are really nice. The images are bright and colorful. They're borderless cards. The labels are unassuming, very subtly done in a nice little ornate bar at the bottom. The backs of the cards are reversible, sort of. I mean, they're not the same both directions, but they have elements which are readable in both directions, or in each direction. Yeah, might as well just start walking through these. Some of them are a little on the dark side. Pardon the glare from my poor lighting. This card I really like, the Magician. This is the caterpillar who has been smoking a hookah, and he's exhaling the smoke, in which you see representations of the four suits and the four tools of the magician: the wand, sword, pentacle, and cup. And in his exhalation of the smoke, you also see it forming a butterfly, which he will eventually turn into. I find that this deck, I'm not sure it's a standalone deck. I think it's really helpful to know the details in the Alice stories. They make the cards much more relatable than just looking at images on cards. So it adds extra depth and dimension. Here's a shot from referencing Through the Looking Glass rather than the original story. So Tarot in Wonderland, it combines elements from both tales. And it helps to know the characters, and like I may be repeating myself, it adds extra depth to the reading and the symbols if you know which part of the story each of these cards is relating to. Some of these are a little dark, but most of them are pretty bright. You can see these cards relate very much to the Rider-Waite system, and while they have elements from the Alice stories, they don't go in consecutive order. They're kind of all over the map. Some of the images aren't ones that I would have chosen for particular cards, but that's okay. Gives me a new perspective on the stories. I have constantly had to readjust my perspective and approach to Alice. As much as I love the original stories, nobody yet has been accurate in their depictions. I have several DVDs. I have the 1930s Hollywood film, which I like very much, with Charlotte Henry and a cast of dozens of Hollywood people at the time, actors and actresses who were really well known from the 30s, including Cary Grant, W.C. Fields, Gary Cooper, and a number of other people. That's a really good, entertaining one, and that, I believe, combines both stories. Then you also have the Disney version of Alice, which is sort of rewritten things and retold it. And then I have the Tim Burton ones, which I hated at first, and now I really love because I've changed my perspective on them. I think the thing I hated the most about the first Tim Burton one was that it was called Alice in Wonderland. And if you had never read the books and you saw that film, you wouldn't know that it was a sequel to the original stories, and therefore should not be called Alice in Wonderland. And even in the movie, they referred to it as Underland. And had they titled it Alice in Underland, or Alice in Wonderland, the sequel, I would have embraced it. But the fact that they misrepresented it, I felt, as Alice in Wonderland, really gave me difficulty with embracing the movie. Once I got past that, I now really like that film. But none of those are accurate to the book stories. I recommend reading the books. Oh, I wanted to make a note. This card, I don't know if you can make this out. You see some little fragments at the bottom and clothing under a wall. Now, if you don't know the story, you might not know that that is the remains of Humpty Dumpty. And I feel like the illustrator probably should have left a larger fragment of eggshell with a bit of face on it or something, so you had more of a clue that that's the remains of Humpty Dumpty. It still reads as a 10 of swords, but I think it has more meaning if you know Humpty Dumpty's story. And as it turns out, he appears several cards later as the King of Swords. So these are not progressing in a natural order, because here you can see this is pre-falling off the wall and breaking into pieces. Or I suppose it could be after he'd been rescued by the king and all his men and put back together again. I really like this card. I love cards. There are a couple cards in the Everyday Witch Tarot that are like this, sort of like quaint little shops with shelves of little interesting items for sale on the back behind the counter person. I love little shops like that, little setups. And there's the last card. So that's the Tarot in Wonderland by Barbara Moore from Llewellyn. It's a substantial deck, but manageable to shuffle. The cards are nice and slippery. As much as they're glossy, they don't stick or clump together, which is appreciated. I don't like it when cards do that. These handle very nicely. And yeah, there you have it. And check out those books and check out the cards, and I will see you next time.